The quiet sip before the storm. You step into Yuan Lane, the narrow passageway still alive in memory, even if the tea house it once cradled has long vanished. The air smells faintly of roasted oolong and damp stone. Here, behind shuttered wood doors and paper lanterns gone pale with age, lived one of Shanghai's gentlest crimes of vanishing. Not of a person, but of an entire business, clientele, staff, and stock. Overnight. The Moon Lotus Tea House, established in 1921, was not grand, but it was known to its regulars, a place where brokers, boatmen, poets, and even retired gangsters gathered to sip, talk, and forget. It wasn't luxury, it was legacy. But in the spring of 1935, the Moon Lotus closed on a Tuesday night after pouring its last round of chrysanthemum, and by Wednesday morning it had vanished. Not merely abandoned, but scrubbed clean from the lane. No doors, no signage, no tea crates, no staff, only dust. Even the bricks seemed rearranged. A business that vanished like steam. This was no ordinary closure. The regulars, and they were many, began to whisper. Mr. Liu, the toothless mahjong addict who always sat by the window, returned for his morning cup and found no trace of the place. His confusion turned to fear when he knocked on a neighboring tailor's door and was told, "What tea house? There's never been a tea house there." It was impossible. There were receipts, deliveries, a line of vendors and suppliers, even a paper trail, albeit sparse, like many businesses in 1930s Shanghai that operated on both ledgers and whispers. The first official to take notice was Inspector Lin Hua. A cautious man, recently promoted from petty theft investigations, Lin believed in paper more than people. He went to the site, interviewed the shop owners nearby, and found only denial or vague recollection. "I think I remember a tea place," said one vendor, "but maybe I'm confusing it with the one down by the river." Still, Lin persisted. He asked for merchant registration records. None existed for Moon Lotus. Health permits? Nothing. Water usage, normal. Tax filings, no such business name found. It was as if Moon Lotus had never officially existed. Ghost business, real profits. And yet there was money. One bank, Zhanghua Trust, noted regular cash deposits from an account belonging to a Ms. Wei. She had signed in as proprietor of Moon Lotus on at least 4 ledgers. The problem? No one could locate her. The bank had a grainy ID copy, a signature, and no forwarding address. The tea supplies came from a distributor in Hangzhou who confirmed bi-monthly shipments for 3 years, delivered to Yuan Lane. But all payments were in cash. No pickup signature, no photographs. And here, where it gets stranger after the disappearance, the Hangzhou supplier reported a final, prepaid order, 20 crates of rare smoked lapsang souchong, worth a fortune, dispatched 2 days before the tea house vanished, never seen again. No crates were found. No witnesses saw a cart or truck leave Yuan Lane during the night. An elegantly orchestrated disappearance. What makes this crime so strange isn't just the logistics, it's the complete absence of aftermath. No looting, no broken locks, no claims from landlords or business partners, no anxious staffers looking for owed wages. Only one man came forward, a delivery boy, aged 14, who claimed to have swept floors at Moon Lotus for half a steamed bun a day. He said the boss lady, Ms. Wei, was kind, always brewing extra tea for him, and once told him, "If one day you find the tea gone, don't look for it. Just remember the warmth." That boy, now in his 90s and long since retired in Toronto, gave this quote in a 2002 interview to a local Chinese-language radio station. When pressed about details, he claimed the tea house wasn't meant to last, and that the entire business had been a cover, but for what, he would not say. A cover for what? This open speculation. Was Moon Lotus a front for smuggling? Possibly opium. The police had raided dozens of fronts camouflaged as bakeries or silk shops, but none so sophisticated as this. Yet Lin Hua's investigation found no signs of chemical residue or drug paraphernalia in the area. No bribes recorded. No gangland affiliations noted. Other theories emerged. Spy network. The 1930s were volatile. Some believed Moon Lotus was a Japanese intelligence cell. Others thought it housed anti-Japanese resistance messengers. Triad laundering. With many quiet businesses used to clean dirty money, perhaps the tea shop was just a ledger on the move. Escape scheme. That Ms. Wei used the tea house to slowly fund a mass escape of refugees or dissidents, and shut it down once her work was done. But again, no arrests, no victims, no losses filed, just absence. The slow death of curiosity. Over the next few months, public interest waned. Lin Hua was reassigned to a burglary case involving antique coins. The report on Moon Lotus was quietly filed under unresolved business disappearance and stamped with the date, May 3, 1935. The property itself was repurposed within the year, sold to a grain vendor who never once mentioned strange hauntings or mysterious tea scents. By 1941, the Japanese invasion and war had blanketed the city in deeper shadows, and Moon Lotus faded into near myth. But here where you come in. A few years ago, a set of tea crates, ancient, hand-carved and filled with perfectly preserved lapsang, were unearthed during a renovation near Yuan Lane. The wood matched those ordered by Moon Lotus, and inside one crate was a note, written in graceful brushstroke. This tea is not stolen, it is merely waiting. Who wrote it, why hide it, and why disappear at all? That's what we'll begin to uncover in the next section. The crates that reopened the case. It had been nearly 70 years since the Moon Lotus tea house dissolved into silence. Then, in 2003, a renovation crew working in a once-forgotten corner of Yuan Lane unearthed something unexpected beneath a cracked foundation. 6 wooden crates, sealed and wrapped in faded oilskin, lay hidden in a crawlspace between 2 crumbling stone walls. The wood was dark with age, but the scent that escaped when the first lid cracked open was unmistakable lapsang souchong. Smoky, rich, and perfectly preserved, like a secret exhaled after decades of breathless waiting. An aging carpenter on site remembered the legend of the vanishing tea house. When the ink-brushed note was found in the 6th crate, "This tea is not stolen. It is merely waiting." The media pounced. Overnight, the case was reborn. Enter Detective Junwei Song, the reopening. Detective Junwei Song, then a senior investigator with the Historical Crimes Division of the Shanghai Municipal Archives Bureau, was assigned to the rediscovery. A methodical man with a background in archival forensics, Song saw the mystery not as folklore but as an unclosed ledger. He studied the original 1935 case file. Lin Hua's notes were sparse but precise. Dates, vendor interviews, lack of paper trail. Song was immediately intrigued by the crates, not just what they contained but what they didn't. Each crate had been built with false panels, small, hidden cavities that once might have housed vials, folded letters, or even documents. Whatever they contained in 1935 was no longer there. This confirmed something crucial. The tea may have been the mask, not the prize. A hidden network. Cross-referencing shipping manifests from the Hangzhou supplier revealed something odd. Moon Lotus had not ordered 20 crates, as previously believed, but 26. 6 had now been found. 20 remained missing. Song began reconstructing a map of possible storage points. He noticed a pattern. The crates had arrived through back channels, never touching the main port or customs office. They were walked in, carted on foot by a now-defunct delivery guild, the Red Palm Cooperative, known at the time for hearing ex-gangsters and smugglers as laborers. Of the 14 names linked to the cooperative in 1935, only one was still alive. His name was Gao Tailan, age 102, bedridden in a hospice just outside Hangzhou. Song visited him in late autumn. Gao, lucid despite his frailty, confirmed he'd once worked Yuan Lane. Moon Lotus, he whispered, eyes foggy. Yes, we didn't carry tea, not really. What did you carry? Song asked. Gao's response was chilling. The kind of paper that could get people killed. The resistance theory strengthened. At the time of Moon Lotus closure, the Japanese occupation had not yet begun, but tensions were rising. Nationalist and communist factions were covertly mobilizing. Shanghai's underworld was a patchwork of espionage, hidden messages, and alliances that shifted like river currents. Song speculated, what if Moon Lotus wasn't a tea house at all, but a hub for encrypted message transfers, hidden in plain sight beneath the clink of porcelain cups? There was precedent. In 1933, a noodle shop in Nanjing was uncovered as a courier post for nationalist fighters. The owners were never found. The method: crates of dried mushrooms with hollow stems, carrying paper scrolls inside. Song turned to linguistic analysis. The calligraphy on the rediscovered crate note, "This tea is not stolen. It is merely waiting," bore stylistic similarities to known resistance pamphlets from the same era. But what would Ms. Wei, the mysterious owner, risk so much for? That answer came unexpectedly from a poetry journal. The Poetic Trail. In an obscure 1934 edition of the Orchid Pavilion Review, a poem titled "Beneath the Steeping Leaves" appeared under the pen name LLW. The poem, while seemingly about tea, included cryptic phrases like, "We sip not to taste, but to pass the leaf folded once, thrice steeped, and then burned." The initials LLW sparked something in Song. He recalled the bank ledger, deposits made by a woman named Lion Lan Wei. He dug further. A university record from 1922 listed a Lion Lan Wei as a poetry student at Aurora University, majoring in literature and cryptology. A rare mix. Her final thesis: the semiotics of teacup inscription in wartime messaging. She had the skills, the motive, the perfect cover. The disappearing staff. What of the other employees? The ones who served tea, swept floors, greeted regulars. Song interviewed elderly locals who remembered oddities about Moon Lotus's waitstaff. They were unusually quiet, never shared names, always wore the same faded indigo robes, not uncommon, but curiously uniform. And they never seemed to eat. One man, now in his late 80s, remembered sneaking into the alley one night to return a debt to a kitchen worker, only to find the tea house dark. Inside, he saw 6 figures sitting completely still at separate tables, eyes open, but unmoving. They looked like mannequins, he recalled, but then one turned to face me and smiled. He never went back. Was the staff a facade, like stage props? Actors in a drama no one was meant to fully understand? Or were they operatives, waiting for messages hidden in teacups and teaspoons? The city watches silently. As Song's investigation gained traction, pressure grew from unnamed bureaucratic channels. His request to dig beneath a nearby alley suspected to hide more crates was denied without explanation. His files began to vanish from internal systems. Emails went unanswered. Then came a message, slipped under his door, typed on onion skin paper. "Let sleeping tea lie." Song was not easily intimidated, but he understood power. He retired early the next year. And yet, before leaving his post, he made one last public remark during a university lecture on covert resistance networks. He said, "Not all crimes are solved. Some are absorbed into history. Some are allowed to fade not because they aren't true, but because the truth is too gentle to be heard among louder lies." Unanswered still. To this day, no definitive conclusion has been reached about the Moon Lotus tea house. Was it an elegant ruse to funnel information through silence? Was Ms. Wei a patriot, a criminal, or both? And why did no one ever report the disappearance? In some corners of modern Shanghai, old men still whisper that if you pass Huayuan Lane after midnight and smell the smoke of tea, it means a message has arrived, and someone, somewhere, is still listening. The tea house returns briefly. In the winter of 2011, a peculiar establishment opened quietly on the outskirts of Shanghai's French concession. It bore no sign, had no online listing, and served only 3 types of tea: smoked lapsang souchong, osmanthus black, and aged pu'er. The interior was minimalist, rough stone floors, a faded scroll behind the bar, and 6 simple tables. Its name, Moon Lotus, spoken only in whispers. Locals who stumbled in described it as peaceful, almost unnervingly so. The staff wore indigo robes. A single woman served the tea, graceful, elderly, and silent. She never introduced herself, but a customer once claimed to glimpse a name embroidered faintly on her sleeve cuff: El Wei. Within 3 months, the shop closed. A note was left on the door: "The kettle is empty. Thank you for remembering." No permits were found, no lease registered, no photos exist, at least none that remain online. The domain name associated with the Moon Lotus Google Maps listing disappeared a week later. All that remained was a single review on a tea blog. "Never had tea like that again. Felt like a memory in a cup." Was this a tribute to the original Moon Lotus, a re-emergence? Or was it part of the same story, echoing across time, through cups of warmth and silence? Tracing Ms. Wei, the woman without a past. Detective Junwei Song, though retired, was not finished. Driven by quiet obsession, he continued his research from home. In 2014, he made a breakthrough: a passenger manifest from 1936, listing a Wei Lion land departing Shanghai aboard a merchant vessel bound for Singapore. Her occupation: archivist. Song contacted the Singaporean National Archives, who confirmed that a woman by that name worked there from 1937 to 1951. After that, the record goes cold. He found one remaining clue: a single book in their collection, catalogued under Wei's name as contributing editor, an annotated anthology of Tang Dynasty tea poems, published in 1950. Inside the front cover, she'd inscribed a dedication: "To those who pass messages gently, your silence was heard." Song published his findings in a limited academic journal, Tea and Shadow: Hidden Networks in 20th Century East Asia. It received little attention, but among sinologists and cryptologists, it was seen as revolutionary, a probable confirmation that Moon Lotus had indeed operated as a covert resistance node, using tea not just as cover, but as language. The tea notes, crate inscriptions, flavor combinations, all carefully coded, poetic, and ephemeral. Just like Wei herself. The staff vanished, reimagined, or reborn. What became of the silent employees? A 1960s photo from a Chinese community center in Toronto shows a group of elderly immigrants seated at a long banquet table. Among them is a woman bearing a strong resemblance to Wei, her name listed only as Auntie Orchid. 2 men flanking her were later identified as brothers from the Red Palm Cooperative, known in police records as the Ink Hands, couriers for anti-imperial resistance during the 1930s. Both disappeared after the Japanese occupation. One carried a silver spoon on a chain around his neck. Curiously, in the 2002 radio interview mentioned earlier, the one with the former delivery boy turned Toronto retiree, he was asked if he still remembered how the messages were passed. He simply laughed and said, "Only the tea remembers, and the tea never talks." Was it a crime at all? Herein lies the paradox. The Moon Lotus Tea House was never officially accused of wrongdoing. No theft, no violence, no contraband found, its only transgression: absence. And yet, Shanghai's authorities at the time pursued it as a crime, allocating investigative resources and surveillance. Why? because something had slipped through the cracks, a communication line, a set of unknown intentions. Something graceful but deliberate. Wei and her team vanished too neatly, suggesting they were not fleeing in fear, but retreating by design. Their exit was not an escape. It was a conclusion. One written in steam and steeped in silence. What remains today? The 6 crates unearthed in 2003 are stored at the Shanghai Historical Museum, though only one is displayed publicly. The calligraphy note has been translated into 11 languages and hangs in tea houses from Kyoto to San Francisco. A 2021 short documentary, Steam and Silence, recounts the Moon Lotus mystery, featuring clips from Song's final interview before his death in 2017. No descendants of Ms. Wei have ever come forward. If she had children, they've kept her secret or never knew it. Still, there are quiet rumors of tea leaves shaped like Chinese characters, of pop-up tea stalls across Asian cities that appear for a day and vanish, leaving only the faint scent of lapsang and a message in the bottom of the cup. The final reflection. In a world obsessed with spectacle and scandal, the story of the Moon Lotus Tea House is a rare thing, a crime so subtle, so serene, that even after nearly a century, it remains unresolved, undefinable, and somehow deeply human. It reminds us that not all crimes shout. Some simply steep in history, in memory, and in the spaces between sips. So the next time you brew tea late at night, in quiet solitude, consider this. What messages might be passed in the warmth of a forgotten cup? The smiling monks of Sichuan Alley. In 1932, Shanghai's French concession was a place of strange contradictions. The elegant boulevards echoed with jazz from European clubs while war refugees sold hand-copied books from curbside mats. Crime in the city was omnipresent, but often polite, calculated, and hidden behind rituals of respectability. One such case began quietly in the French concession's Buddhist quarter, tucked near the edge of Sichuan Alley, where a group of monks had taken residence in a crumbling structure known as Luquan Temple. They wore saffron robes, walked barefoot, and carried prayer beads. Locals described them as gentle, serene, and charitable. Each morning they chanted softly before distributing kanji to the poor. Their incense drifted in curls over the alley, calming. But there was one unusual detail. Every evening after the lanterns dimmed and the kanji pots were scrubbed clean, a black rickshaw would arrive, unmarked, and disappear behind the temple gates. It never stayed more than 15 minutes, and no one ever saw who sat inside. Opium disguised in smoke. That same year, the French concession police, FCP, were drowning in complaints about a new, highly concentrated opium blend flooding Shanghai streets. Unlike the diluted paste typically cut and sold in back alleys, this blend, called shadow resin, was potent, expensive, and deeply addictive. Its origin unknown. Distribution lines inconsistent. But what made it stand out and caught the attention of Inspector Henry Dufresne, one of the few French officials who spoke fluent Mandarin, was its incense-like scent. He first encountered it during a raid in the gambling den below the Pearl Dragon Club. The den's air was thick with a fragrance almost holy, sandalwood, musk, and something else. Beneath the usual haze of smoke, Henry recognized the unmistakable signature of temple-grade incense, which, oddly enough, matched the scent wafting from Sichuan Alley. The monk who never prayed. One evening, dressed in civilian clothes, Dufresne took a slow walk through the alley, pausing before the Luquan Temple gates. A young monk, face obscured by the fatting dusk, opened them and offered him tea. Henry bowed politely, declined, and walked on. But something felt wrong. The monk's hands scarred, calloused, not the hands of one who prays or meditates, no rosary beads, and when he bowed, his posture revealed a bulge beneath his robe, a weapon, a pouch. Dufresne made note. That night, he initiated a quiet surveillance order. A web of disappearances. The following weeks revealed strange patterns. 6 street kids who regularly received food from the monks were suddenly missing. 2 returned, one with no memory of what happened, the other traumatized and mute. The temple also increased its rice and water deliveries, orders too large for its public services. Dufresne confirmed that several shipments had false addresses. When he traced the warehouse receipts, he discovered they had been paid for in Spanish silver coins, a currency long out of circulation but popular among black market traders due to its traceability. More rickshaws began arriving at odd hours. A few were spotted carting out bundles wrapped in yellow silk, loaded quickly and silently. One driver, caught in a routine traffic sweep, claimed he was delivering sacred scrolls to a monastery in Suzhou. But when investigators opened his bundle, they found nothing. It had been empty. Dufresne knew this trick, a dry run designed to test police response times. Something big was being prepared. Infiltration plan, the novice gambit. With no warrant and lacking cooperation from local officials, Dufresne turned to a desperate tactic: infiltration. A young FCP officer, Su Ming, was chosen to pose as a temple novice, a runaway with nowhere to go, seeking spiritual refuge. Clean-cut, deeply observant, and raised Buddhist, Su was a natural fit. He spent 2 nights sleeping outside Luquan's gates before the monks relented and let him in. He would spend 18 days inside the temple, during which he witnessed one of Shanghai's most elaborate criminal disguises unfold. He reported, the monks were not monks. At least 4 were ex-convicts known to the triad-run Yellow Bamboo Syndicate. Prayers were staged for the public. At night, chanting was replaced with Morse code tapping, used to signal across rooms and walls. The incense burners were specially constructed, filled with opium resin disguised under layers of wax and crushed sandalwood. The temple's altar had a false bottom. Beneath it was a trapdoor leading to an underground tunnel. Where did the tunnel lead? He never found out. On his 19th day, Su was discovered rifling through a shipment manifest. He was beaten and expelled. He barely made it back to Dufresne alive. But he brought one thing with him, a small scrap of parchment stuffed inside his robe during the attack. Written in French and Mandarin, it read, "Delivery confirmed. River meets Jade, March 11th. A date, a dock, etc." Dufresne believed this was a coded drop-off location and date. He deduced the river referred to Huangpu River, and Jade to Jade Pier, a former customs dock long abandoned and now used by river traders and smugglers. On the night of March 11th, Dufresne and a small unit of FCP officers staked out Jade Pier from the rooftops above. At exactly midnight, a single junk boat approached, unlit but steady. From its cabin emerged 2 figures, one wearing the flowing robes of a monk. Behind them, porters unloaded crates wrapped in saffron cloth. The officers waited, breath held. Dufresne ordered silence. He wanted to see the exchange before moving. A black rickshaw pulled up. Out stepped a European man in a linen suit, a figure never before connected to the temple, but long rumored to be a liaison for the opium trade. He nodded, passed a coin, Spanish silver again, and received one of the crates. That was the moment Dufresne chose to strike. The raid and the escape. The ambush was precise. Officers descended from rooftops surrounding the dock. Shots were fired, crates splintered. The monk in robes vanished into the river. 2 porters were arrested, 1 wounded. But the man in the linen suit escaped, vanishing down an alley and into the shadows of the Bund. And the crates, everyone packed with incense, ordinary temple-grade sticks, no drugs, no scrolls, no false bottoms. A message had been sent. The temple knew. They had been warned. The temple abandoned again. By dawn, When the FCP raided Luquan Temple, it was empty. No monks, no smoke, no chanting. Inside the altar chamber, they found the false bottom pried open, the tunnel exposed. But it collapsed 10 meters in, likely destroyed deliberately. In the novice quarters, a single teacup remained on the floor, still warm. A note beside it, inked in both French and Mandarin. Karma always finds a vessel, but smoke always rises. An unfinished puzzle. The case was never officially closed, no charges filed, no drugs recovered, but the flood of shadow resin ceased in the months following the temple's disappearance. Was it a temporary freeze, or had the operation relocated? Who warned the temple? Who was the man in the linen suit? And did Luquan ever truly serve Buddhism, or was it only ever a costume for something far more calculated? The Phantom Trail. After the disappearance of the Luquan Temple monks, Inspector Henry Dufresne's investigation entered a murky phase. The raid at Jade Pier had yielded no conclusive evidence, just incense crates, a broken tunnel, and whispers. It was, in the eyes of colonial bureaucracy, a failure. But Dufresne wasn't ready to concede. He still had the parchment Su Ming had smuggled out, the note mentioning river meets jade, and something about the use of French in that message nagged at him. Who, among a ring of Chinese criminals posing as monks, would use fluent French in coded logistics? Unless someone high up, someone within the colonial infrastructure itself, was part of the operation. And suddenly, Dufresne's suspicion turned inward. An inside job. The French concession, for all its ordered boulevards and modern institutions, was rife with corruption. Colonial officers could be bribed. Customs officials often looked the other way. And opium, while technically outlawed, it was still being quietly taxed, a dirty secret whispered through the corridors of colonial power. Dufresne began combing through customs reports for any cargo matching the description of incense, wax, or ceremonial goods imported through French docks over the last year. One pattern stood out. A shipping company, Les Frères Bellamy, had received over 24 separate shipments of monastic goods, all routed from Burma via Calcutta and processed through an intermediary firm called Shun Tea Imports. But no tea was ever sold. No monks ever claimed the goods, and no warehouse ever officially signed for the delivery. Shun Tea Imports, a ghost firm. Dufresne and Officer Su Ming, still recovering but now obsessed with the case himself, tracked the address listed for Shun Tea Imports. It led to a single-room office above a cobbler's shop, completely bare except for a desk, an abacus, and a ledger book, locked in a steel box. The box was empty, but Su noticed something carved into the underside of the desk, barely visible in the dim light. Yin Cha Feng Yan, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Hide smoke in the tea. It was more than metaphor, it was instruction. Opium in the incense. Su posed a theory. The opium wasn't just disguised as incense, it was infused into it. The shadow resin might have been smokable as incense, released gradually and passively inhaled by anyone in its proximity. It would explain the holy haze Dufresne had noticed during raids. And it made the operation even more dangerous because users didn't know they were consuming it. It could be deployed anywhere: gambling dens, brothels, parlors, even upper-class drawing rooms, and no one would suspect a thing. An invisible drug, a high without a pipe. And more importantly, it meant the French concession police had no mechanism to detect it. The monk in the archives. Su's theory gained unexpected validation when a retired archivist, Mr. Gao Liang, reached out. He'd heard the radio broadcast about the missing temple monks and claimed to remember one of them, a tall, silent man who came into the municipal archives, several times between 1929 and 1931. Always wearing monks' robes, always asking about property records for disused religious sites. He never gave a name, Gao said, but he smelled like sandalwood and mint, not the kind of scent monks usually wear, more like perfume covering something stronger. One of the addresses requested Luquan Temple. Another, a defunct Taoist monastery near Suzhou Creek. That location was important, because 2 days earlier, a dock worker at Suzhou Creek had collapsed mid-shift, no alcohol, no drugs, no prior health issues. But his lungs were blackened, as if from long-term opium use. His wife swore he was clean. He didn't even smoke cigarettes, she told the doctor. But he did sweep incense ash at an herbal shop, across from a newly built temple. The disciples of the Hollow Bell. Su and Dufresne visited the Suzhou Creek location, a pristine, white stone temple with an ornate bronze bell in its courtyard. The monks there wore gray robes, not saffron, and claimed no connection to Luquan. But their incense, identical. Same scent, same ash composition, same supplier, Shun Tea Imports. Only this time, the incense sticks were branded. They bore a name, the Hollow Bell line, and a Sanskrit symbol that, when cross-referenced, revealed a hidden message. Purity through smoke. It was too blatant to be coincidence. A whisper from the inside. Just as Dufresne prepared to issue a full investigation into the Suzhou Creek Temple, a message arrived at his apartment. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded sheet of rice paper under his door. Inside was a list of 7 names. Each belonged to a senior colonial official, including a former customs chief, a shipping registry clerk, a health inspector, and 2 retired French policemen. All had financial links to Les Frères Bellamy, the shipping company used to import the incense. The final name, Henry Dufresne, his own. But the account listed under his name was fake, a setup. Someone was trying to discredit or frame him before he could act further. The vanishing point, Su Ming disappears. In early summer, Su Ming failed to appear for roll call. He never returned home. His apartment was undisturbed, the tea on his table still warm. The only trace left behind, a single stick of incense, unlit, placed on his pillow. Tests later revealed it contained trace elements of morphine base, indicating it had been soaked, dried, and repackaged. It was a delivery method, a message. Dufresne was shaken. Su had become more than a colleague. He was a friend, and he was gone like the monks before him. The system had closed its fist. When the smoke clears. By year's end, Dufresne submitted his resignation, citing health and political fatigue. He retired to Marseille, where he published a short memoir under a pseudonym. In the Temple of Ash, dispatches from the Opium War we pretended not to fight. Only 112 copies were printed, most vanished. In it he wrote, "The monks wore robes not to pray, but to disappear. Their silence was not piety, but precision. And the smoke they lit did not bless, it controlled. A city still breathing. Today, there's a bubble tea shop where Luquan Temple once stood. The owner says the building always smells faintly of incense, even though she never burns any. Some nights, rickshaw drivers claim to see figures in saffron robes walking the alleys, barefoot and wordless. And just last year, a crate of antique incense was found in a private warehouse near the old docks. Inside, a single coin rested on top, Spanish silver, along with a slip of paper that read, "The prayer ends when the smoke stops rising." But who were they really? Monks turned smugglers, or smugglers disguised as monks? And how much of what they did was enabled by the very system meant to stop them? The echo in the ashes. By late 1933, the Luquan Temple case was all but buried professionally, politically, and publicly. No charges were ever filed. The temple's land was quietly repurposed, its name erased from most official documents. Inspector Henry Dufresne had vanished from the city. Officer Su Ming had vanished from existence. But the effects lingered. Shadow resin never fully returned to the market, but its legacy haunted Shanghai's criminal and cultural memory for decades. In whispers, in allegories, in quiet tea-house conversations, people told stories of the monks who never prayed. Even today, in certain back alleys of the former French concession, old men say you can smell that strange incense again after a heavy rain, a mixture of sandalwood and something far darker. It was never proven, but no one really doubted. Luquan Temple had been a front for one of the most advanced opium smuggling operations in pre-war China. And it wasn't an isolated case. The monastic network. In the years that followed, authorities in other Chinese cities, Nanjing, Suzhou, even distant Harbin, began to discover similar patterns. Sudden influxes of foreign incense, not matching any import paperwork. Abandoned monasteries suddenly revived, with a handful of itinerant monks. Disappearances of local street children, often those who begged outside temples. Quiet deaths attributed to spiritual exhaustion or divine withdrawal. In each case there was no direct proof of opium smuggling, no smoking pipes, no dens, no large seizures. Just faint traces of morphine, alkaloid, and ash samples, and a pervasive cultural reluctance to question the sanctity of the monastic image. The belief in a monk's purity, his detachment from worldly vice, was both the perfect disguise and the perfect protection. As one Shanghai sociologist wrote in 1948, "The most dangerous smuggler is not the man with a gun or a gold ring. It is the one who bows before you and tells you that desire is illusion. For in that moment, your guard is lowered. And that is when the transaction begins." The man in the linen suit. Who was the European man seen at Jade Pier the night of the raid? This question would haunt Dufresne even after his retirement. He believed, and later hinted in his private writings, that the man was likely Etienne Cazalet, a French-Spanish trader with deep connections to both the opium processing syndicates in Burma and corrupt shipping authorities along the Chinese coast. Cazalet had vanished in early 1934, following the Luquan collapse. He was never arrested, and no warrant was ever issued. But Dufresne received a letter in 1936, unsigned, postmarked from Saigon, containing only a photograph. A European man in a linen suit seated beside a monk at an open-air tea stall, both looking directly into the lens, unsmiling. On the back, in delicate French script, "Smoke without fire, fire without consequence." The photo was burned. Su Ming, a legacy in silence. Of all the characters in this story, Officer Su Ming remains the most enigmatic. He had no family, no living parents, no romantic attachments. His disappearance was marked by a brief obituary in the back pages of a French-language newspaper, noting only that he was missing, presumed dead. But in 1945, after the war, a Canadian journalist interviewing displaced persons in Kunming met a man calling himself Brother Liang, who claimed he had once worn the robes of criminals before choosing to live out his days among true monks. When shown a picture of Su, the man said nothing, but he held the image to his forehead for a long time, then placed it inside an incense burner, lit a single match, and whispered. He knew when to vanish. He always did. Was it him? We'll never know for certain. Dufresne's final thoughts. Henry Dufresne died in 1957 in a quiet coastal town in Brittany. He left behind a sealed journal, delivered posthumously to a professor of East Asian Studies in Lyon. Its final entry read, "You cannot raid a ghost. You cannot prosecute smoke. What we fought was not opium. It was an idea that trust itself could be weaponized, and that a saffron robe could silence even the sharpest law. The Hidden Archive. In 2012, renovations at a colonial-era customs house in Shanghai revealed a locked trunk buried behind a false wall. Inside were dozens of incense sticks, old French and Chinese shipping ledgers, and a complete translation guide, matching Buddhist chants to encrypted drug delivery codes. Among the papers was a photograph, yellowed with time. A group of men in robes, seated in a temple courtyard. One held an abacus, another clutched a small spoon. In the background, barely visible, stood a younger man with a faint smile. Su Ming, or someone who looked very much like him. What we're left with. To this day, the story of Luquan Temple is rarely taught in schools or discussed in official histories. It's too strange, too unresolved, too uncomfortable in what it suggests that righteousness can be mimicked, rituals can be corrupted, and that the line between spiritual refuge and criminal enterprise can be thinner than incense smoke. But perhaps, more than anything, this case reminds us of how trust itself becomes the currency of crime, and how the world's most enduring disguises are those we want to believe. So the next time you pass by a monastery, smell the curling incense in the air, or watch a quiet figure in robes move through a crowd, you might ask yourself, is this devotion or distraction? The parlor that never slept. In 1936, Shanghai was alive at every hour, neon on the Bund, just pouring from French clubs, rickshaw wheels rattling against cobblestones. But in the city's labyrinthine backstreets, the real pulse was measured not in music, but in the clack, clack, clack of mahjong tiles. One such parlor, tucked behind Nanjing Road and accessible only through a narrow, smoky stairwell, was known simply as the Jade Pavilion. It was not the grandest, nor the richest, but it was constant. The games ran 24 hours. The tables never cooled. The gamblers were everything from dockworkers and shop clerks to policemen and syndicate bosses. And in the early hours of October 17th, the Jade Pavilion became the site of one of Shanghai's most brutal and baffling murders. The victim. The man found dead was Chen Kaiyang, a mid-level accountant for the Minsheng Bank. He was 38, respected, and not known for gambling debts, but that night he had been winning. Witnesses recalled him smiling faintly, counting his winnings with precise, careful fingers. At 2:17 a.m., a loud crash was heard near the back table. When players rushed over, Chen was found slumped forward, his temple split, blood spilling across the green felt mat. His tiles, 2 dragons and a concealed Kong, were scattered and stained. At first, some thought he had collapsed from a stroke, but the wound was unmistakable, a single strike from a heavy, blunt object. And the killer gone. The impossible exit. The Jade Pavilion's layout made escape nearly impossible. The stairwell was narrow, the doors heavy, the corridor outside watched by at least 2 porters. Yet no one saw anyone leave. Every patron was accounted for mid-game when the body was discovered. Police arrived within 20 minutes. They found the murder weapon tossed under a side table, a weighted mahjong tile rack, its corner bloodied. But no fingerprints, no smears, no sign of struggle. And strangest of all, no money missing. Chen's winnings, stacked neatly at his side, were untouched. His watch, wallet, and bank documents were still on him. This was not a robbery, it was an execution. The suspects at the table. 4 men had been playing at Chen's table that night. Wang Iron Palm de Guang, a retired enforcer from the Green Gang, now a semi-legitimate businessman. He had been losing heavily that evening. Professor Liang Shaoyi, a soft-spoken mathematics lecturer from Fudan University, rumored to frequent gambling dens for field research. Mei Zhensu, a tailor's son, barely 22, known for a nervous stutter and an obsession with perfect tile arrangements. An unknown player, described only as wearing a gray cap, his face shadowed, who vanished after the murder and was never identified. Each had motive, each denied involvement. But the puzzle lay not in why, but how. Inspector Feng takes the case. The case fell to Inspector Feng Yaosheng, a rising star in the Shanghai Municipal Police. Feng was meticulous, skeptical of superstition, and known for his unshakable patience. Where others saw a chaotic gambling den, Feng saw a controlled environment. He reconstructed the crime. Chen was alive at 2:15 a.m., seen placing his final bet. By 2:17 he was dead. The room was crowded, at least 20 patrons, 5 tables in play. No one reported hearing footsteps or a struggle. The stairwell guard swore no one passed. The murder had occurred in plain sight, and yet invisibly. The mahjong puzzle. Feng examined the table. Chen's hand of tiles intrigued him. He had been holding a nearly complete all-dragon's hand, rare, difficult, and worth an immense payout. Only one tile was missing. The missing tile. The white dragon. Feng searched the floor. It was nowhere, not under the table, not in Chen's sleeve, not among the bloodied tiles. One white dragon tile had vanished with the killer. Why? The bank connection. Digging into Chen's life, Feng discovered something hidden beneath the victim's respectable exterior. As an accountant for Minsheng Bank, Chen had overseen foreign transfers. In the months before his death, he had flagged several irregularities: deposits that vanished mid-transfer, payments rerouted to untraceable shell accounts. His notes suggested he suspected money laundering, possibly linked to the Green Gang. Had Chen been silenced before he could act? If so, why kill him in public, in a crowded mahjong parlor, instead of in a quiet alley or a staged accident? Unless the public nature of the murder was the message. Witness whispers. Several patrons remembered the mysterious fourth player in the gray cap. He had arrived late, played silently, and avoided eye contact. When the murder was discovered, no one saw him leave, but afterward the seat was empty. One witness swore he saw the man flick a tile into his sleeve. A white dragon. Another said the man carried prayer beads around his wrist, odd, in a gambling den. When asked to describe his face, all anyone remembered was that he looked like no one in particular. An omen in tiles. In Chinese superstition, the white dragon tile symbolizes both purity and death. In underground gambling circles, leaving one behind was sometimes interpreted as a death mark, a silent threat from the Green Gang, triads, or other syndicates. If the missing tile had been deliberately removed, it wasn't just part of the game. It was the signature. Feng's dilemma. The inspector was left with too many questions. Was this a gangland hit disguised as a gambling spat? Or a financial assassination, silencing a man who knew too much? Who was the unknown player, a ghost of the underworld, or a scapegoat manufactured to confuse the investigation? And most of all, why had Chen's blood been spilled over a winning hand? The unresolved table. As dawn broke, the Jade Pavilion remained eerily silent. The tables were cleared, the patrons released, but the bloodstain on the green felt lingered. Inspector Feng stared at the missing white dragon slot in the tile set, feeling the weight of something much larger than a single murder. A crime committed in full view, yet invisible. A man killed not for what he lost, but for what he might have revealed. And somewhere in Shanghai, someone carried a white dragon tile in their pocket, a piece of the puzzle that no law could compel them to return. A ghost in the records. Inspector Feng Yaosheng returned to the station with more questions than answers. The death of Chen Kaiyang was unlike any case he had ever worked, not just because of the violence or the mystery, but because of the precision. There was no panic, no theft, no visible motive. Just a single strike, perfectly timed, and a missing white dragon tile. Feng began by checking the official roster of the patrons at the Jade Pavilion. The parlor, though technically unlicensed, kept nightly ledgers of its high-stakes players, partly to protect itself from legal raids, partly to manage debts. Chen's name was there. So were Wang Diguang, Professor Liang, and Mei Zhensu. But there was no mention of the fourth player. No alias, no initials, no chip record. As far as the ledger was concerned, that seat was empty, which meant someone with access to the books, either the manager or a connected enforcer, had scrubbed the entry. Someone was protecting the ghost. A visit to Wang Iron Palm Diguang. Of the three surviving players, Wang Diguang was the most volatile, a former enforcer for the Green Gang, known for brutal tactics and a deep paranoia about betrayal. Feng found him 2 days later at his shopfront in Jiabei, where he sold antique locks and safes under the ironic name Peaceful Treasures. Wang was direct. He admitted to playing that night but denied any knowledge of the killing. He was winning, Wang said, voice low, but not enough to die for. When Feng asked about the fourth player, Wang's demeanor shifted. There were only 3 of us, he said. Chen played like 4 men, but only 3 sat at that table. Feng pressed harder. Someone saw you arguing before the last round. Wang lit a cigarette with trembling hands. He said something about the bank, about files. I told him to shut up. I didn't kill him, Inspector, but he was digging somewhere he shouldn't. And then quietly, check the safe deposit room at Minsheng Bank. If he left anything behind, it's not in his apartment. The bank within the bank. Feng obtained a warrant for Chen Kaiyang's private deposit box. The bank resisted at first, but the pressure of a murder investigation pushed the doors open. Inside the box were 2 items. A hand-copied ledger detailing 6 suspicious wire transfers from Minsheng Bank to shell companies registered in Macau and Singapore. Each transaction bore internal reference codes but no listed recipients. A tile, the white dragon, perfectly clean, wrapped in silk. Feng's breath caught. It wasn't the murder tile, that one had vanished. This was a second, symbolic, a signal, a warning, or maybe a confession. But who was the message for? And why did Chen hide it? The mathematician's game. Next, Feng visited Professor Liang, the university lecturer known for his deep knowledge of probability and game theory. Liang lived in a modest apartment filled with scrolls, abacuses, and ink-stained ledgers. He welcomed Feng with herbal tea and a tired smile. I imagine this isn't about my evening lectures, he said dryly. Liang admitted to being present during the murder, but like Wang, he denied seeing anything unusual. Chen was focused, as always, the fourth seat, empty. Some say a man sat there. I say maybe it was his fear. Feng frowned. That's not how fear works. No, Liang replied, but paranoia does. Chen had been playing erratically all night, watching the door, touching his coat, like he expected someone. Feng asked him about Chen's bank work. Liang paused. He once told me, Liang said, that numbers don't lie but people behind them do. Then he said something curious. You know, in Mahjong, when someone wins with a hidden Kong, it's not just a surprise. It's a lesson in misdirection. You think you see the whole board, but you never do. Feng left unsettled. Mei Zhensu's obsession. The last known player, Mei Zhensu, was barely a man, 22 years old, gaunt, with fingers stained by ink and glue. He worked at his father's tailor shop, but spent most evenings at gambling dens, not to win, but to perfect tile symmetry. Feng found him hunched over a homemade mahjong set, polishing tiles. They're not meant to be sharp, he said when Feng asked what he was doing. They're supposed to glide like memory. Mei confessed to feeling terrified that night. I didn't see the killer, he said, but I felt it. The moment Chen slumped forward, it was like the room got heavier, like we were all holding our breath and didn't know why. He swore there was a fourth player, silent, methodical. He didn't blink, May whispered, and he never touched his tea. Feng asked if he noticed anything else. May nodded. He kept one tile separate from the others, turned face down. White dragon, I think. He placed it to the left of his set, as if it wasn't part of the game. A name from the shadows. Feng, now convinced the fourth man was real, and the killer began to look into known enforcers or debt collectors operating in gambling circles with connections to banking crimes. One name kept surfacing, Jiang Xiaoxuan, also known as the Collector. A former accountant turned enforcer, Jiang was rumored to be a cleanup man for financial syndicates. He never raised his voice, never struck in anger. He simply appeared when problems became liabilities and made them disappear. Jiang had once been spotted wearing Buddhist beads and carried a gray cap wherever he went. No foe existed, no official record since 1931. He was a ghost with a balance sheet. The call that never came. Before Feng could issue a warrant, he received a letter, no return address, delivered by hand. Inside, a single mahjong tile, white dragon, identical to the one in the deposit box, identical to the one May had described. On the back, in tiny calligraphy, "Some tiles are better left unplayed. Fold the table, Inspector." Feng kept it. He knew what it meant: walk away or be next. Where the tiles rest. The Jade Pavilion was shut down a month later in an unrelated gambling bust. No charges were filed in Chen's case. The manager disappeared. The books were seized but found scrubbed. Feng, officially reprimanded for pursuing rumors, was reassigned to petty theft investigations in Hangzhou. He took the demotion with grace, but never stopped asking questions in private. Years later, a tile set was discovered in a storage locker during a drug raid. The tiles were hand-carved, aged, and oddly weighted. The white dragon tile was missing. In its place was a folded note, smudged with ink and old blood. When numbers go missing, so do men. Let the hand die. The case reopens quietly. 5 years after the murder of Chen Kaiyang, Inspector Feng Yaosheng had settled into the slow, repetitive life of minor theft reports and neighborhood disputes in Hangzhou. But the case that had cost him his post, the mahjong parlor killing, never left his mind. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime or the precision with which it had been executed. It was the elegance of the message. One blow, one vanished tile, one perfect silence. Then, in 1941, an unexpected development jolted the case back to life. A postal worker in Suzhou turned in a sealed envelope addressed to Inspector Feng Yaosheng, Shanghai Metropolitan Police. The address had been out of date for nearly 3 years. Inside the envelope was a grainy photograph of Chen Kaiyang, standing beside a suited man on a balcony, both looking down at a mahjong table. A second photo, the same suited man seated at a different table holding a white dragon tile. A note: Jiang Xiaoxuan sends his regards. Jiang the Collector had resurfaced. But why send a message now? And why to a disgraced inspector with no authority to act? The Collector's signature. The photos provided Feng with the most crucial clue yet, proof that Jiang and Chen had known each other. Not just in passing, but enough to have shared drinks, played private games, and stood side by side for photographs. Feng began to re-examine everything, and the pieces slowly rearranged themselves. What if Chen Kaiyang wasn't just a whistleblower? What if he had once been part of the laundering operation and had turned only after his role became a liability? What if the missing white dragon tile wasn't just symbolic, but the final piece of leverage he held, the proof of a betrayal within the banking system? That would make him both witness and threat. And Jiang, not a random assassin, but the closer, the one called when a risk couldn't be contained with silence alone. An accountant's code. Feng revisited the only surviving artifact from Chen's deposit box, the ledger of 6 suspicious transfers. The reference numbers had been dismissed as routine transaction codes. But with the help of a retired Minsheng Bank archivist, a quiet man with a long memory, Feng discovered something unusual. The codes included a repeating numerical pattern that didn't match any known bank documentation. Each transfer began with a 3-digit sequence, 613. A nod, the archivist suggested, to the scoring system in high-stakes mahjong. Specifically, all honors and all terminals, a rare hand worth 64 points. But there was more. If interpreted phonetically in Shanghainese, 613 sounded like Liu Yao Sun, slang for look behind the curtain. It was a message hidden in financial data. Chen wasn't just recording the crimes. He was begging someone to find them. The game room beneath the floor. The final discovery came from an unlikely place, a renovation crew restoring the building that once housed the Jade Pavilion. While replacing the floorboards of the back room, they found a trapdoor previously unnoticed, leading to a hidden chamber below the parlor. Inside, a single mahjong table, 4 chairs, a safe rusted but intact, a wall-sized board displaying bank names, account numbers, and win-loss tallies, a tin of incense ash, reeking faintly of morphine. This was no ordinary parlor. It was a financial war room, where criminal bosses and bankers settled debts not in ledgers, but across mahjong boards. The games had been real, the stakes, millions in laundered assets. And Chen, he hadn't just been a player. He'd been the scorekeeper. The final hand. Chen's murder now made complete sense. He had knowledge too dangerous to leave unguarded, and he was too principled, or perhaps too frightened, to keep playing. The white dragon tile was his signal, his warning. A silent confession that he intended to expose everything. But Jiang Xiaoxuan got to him first. Not in rage. In ritual. The killing wasn't just efficient, it was symbolic. A hand brought to completion. A concealed Kong revealed too late. Feng's quiet resolution. Feng never reopened the case officially. But he published a quiet article in an academic law journal under a pseudonym, Mahjong and Murder, the role of ritual in underworld enforcement. It drew little attention, just as he wanted. In his personal copy, in the margins beside the section on the white dragon, he scrawled a note in red pencil. Some hands are never meant to win. Some games are meant only to teach. He tried to warn us and paid the price. The white dragon rises again. In 1958, a mahjong set surfaced in a private auction in Taipei. It was plain, old, unremarkable except for one feature. Every tile in the set was white dragon. 136 identical tiles. Each hand played the same, each game a mirror of the last. A private collector bought the set and declined interviews. But when a reporter later visited his home, he noticed something odd. On the mantel sat a single photograph of a man in a gray cap, holding a tile, smiling faintly. Beneath it, in lacquered wood, "May the table remain silent." Reflection. The murder at the Jade Pavilion is officially recorded as unsolved. No convictions, no names made public. It remains one of Shanghai's quietest and most elegant mysteries. But in the world of the old gambling parlors, it's not forgotten. Even today, some players refuse to begin a game without first checking that the white dragon tile is present and facing upward. Because they say, if it's ever missing, it means someone is about to lose more than the hand. The Weavers of Trust. In the late spring of 1937, just before the Marco Polo Bridge incident would catapult China into full-scale war, the merchant streets of Shanghai still hummed with cautious optimism. Silk was flowing. Western buyers were flooding into the French concession, eager to stockpile textiles, garments, and custom bolts of patterned fabric before supply chains became unstable. And in this optimism bloomed a confidence game so elegant, so understated, that few realized they had been robbed until years after the con had ended. At the center of it was a single shop issuing fine silks and imports, a quiet storefront nestled just off Yunnan Road. It was not the biggest, nor the flashiest, but it had something better, an unblemished reputation built on consistency, discretion, and a certain old-world charm. It also had perfect books, or so everyone believed. Until the day they vanished. The Vanishing Ledger. On June 3, 1937, an English trader named Thomas Delaney arrived at Shuang with an invoice in hand, ready to collect on a bulk order of 500 yards of hand-dyed Suzhou silk, paid for in advance, with an additional premium for expedited shipping. He found the doors locked. A sign in the window read, "Closed for family bereavement. Kindly return in 3 days." But no one returned. And by the following week, Delaney wasn't alone. A stream of increasingly agitated buyers, American, French, even domestic high society patrons, gathered outside the shuttered storefront, invoices and receipts in hand. Some had paid in gold, others in bank transfers routed through Hong Kong. All had one thing in common. Shuang was gone. Not just closed. Vanished. No forwarding address, no response to telegrams. The interior stripped bare, not even the display mannequins remained. And most curious of all, the ledger book that tracked every order, every supplier, every payment was missing. Enter Liu Mianhua, forensic accountant. The case would have likely faded into another tale of pre-war bankruptcy, had it not been for Liu Mianhua, a forensic accountant turned investigator for the Shanghai Municipal Chamber of Commerce. Liu, known for his exacting methods and photographic memory, had once uncovered a forgery ring in the shipping industry by knotting a mismatch in the ink used on a single customs stamp. When he heard about Shuang's disappearance, his curiosity was piqued. He began with what others overlooked, the receipts. They were printed on thick stock, embossed with the shop seal, and signed by a woman known only as Madame Shen, the proprietress, rarely seen, known for her dark cheongsams and whispered Mandarin. But Liu noticed something strange. The receipts were all slightly off-center, not by much, just a millimeter or two, enough to suggest that they weren't produced using a commercial press, but hand-aligned, which meant they weren't just documents of record. They were crafted pieces, intentionally imperfect. The thread that unraveled. Liu's next move was to locate the source of the silk. Shuang had claimed exclusive partnership with 3 Suzhou cooperatives, family-run weaving guilds going back generations. He traveled upriver to Suzhou and met with the guild elders. Each told him the same thing. "We stopped supplying Shuang in early 1936. Why? Late payments, falsified weight measurements, and most telling, counterfeit bolts returned as damaged goods, when in fact they had never been woven by the cooperatives at all. Madame Shen had been quietly swapping their work for imitation silks, most likely imported from underground looms operating without licenses in Ningbo and Hangzhou. But where were those records? Who shipped the materials? Who paid for them? Liu returned to Shanghai and dug through port customs records for Shuang's shipments. There was nothing. Not a single bill of lading listed under Shuang's name since October 1935. And yet, orders were being fulfilled well into spring 1937. So who was making deliveries? The shell company trail. The breakthrough came from a clerical error. One French trader who had ordered from Shuang never paid in cash. Instead, he wired funds to a shell company recommended by the shop itself, Xingyao Trading Co. The trader kept the transfer stub. Liu traced Xingyao to a rented office above a dentist's clinic on Rue Lafayette. It had been emptied out 2 months earlier, but in the mailbox was an envelope, stamped but never mailed. Inside, an inventory manifest for Shuang's final week of operations. Every line item matched a customer invoice. But the supplier, Yuancheng Silk and Sons, a name that hadn't appeared in Shanghai commerce records since 1918. The company was defunct, and yet here it was receiving money, shipping goods, and issuing stock, on paper at least. Liu now saw the pattern, a phantom business, resurrected from the past, serving as a financial mask to hide laundering, fraud, and embezzlement. And Madame Shen, a ghost wrapped in silk. The real swindle. This wasn't just a vanishing shop. This was a long con, meticulously built over 4 years. Shuang's business model had been simple. Build a reputation using real, high-quality product. Quietly transition to imitation silks from unregulated looms. Falsify orders, returns, and supplier identities through multiple shell companies. Funnel payments into offshore accounts in British Malaya. Close shop without a trace when suspicion began to rise. And the missing ledger. It wasn't forgotten. It was too valuable to leave behind. A record of every buyer, every lie, every accomplice, including customs officers, bribed inspectors, and complicit bankers. The question of Madame Shen. Who was she? No photograph existed. Some claimed she was a widow of a textile tycoon. Others said she had once been an opera singer. One informant insisted she spoke fluent German and had a Prussian lover. But Liu found her name in one place, a shipping manifest from 1933, where she signed for 14 bolts of silk under the name Shen Yunxiu, listing her occupation as cultural consultant. The trail ended there. The swindle's impact. By August 1937, as war overtook Shanghai, the Shuang scandal was a memory overshadowed by artillery and evacuations. But among foreign traders, it remained infamous. Dozens of importers were financially ruined. 3 investors in London sued the Chamber of Commerce and lost. The imitation silks flooded markets in Manila, Calcutta, and Saigon. Some said the swindle had rippled into textile collapses across Southeast Asia, destabilizing pricing for years. And all of it engineered by a single woman with no factory, no real staff, and no apparent greed for fame or legacy. Just precise deception, beautifully woven. The last clue. In 1950, a parcel arrived at the office of the Singaporean Trade Authority with no return address. Inside, a bolt of silk hand-dyed flawless. A bound book, the Shuang ledger. A note. Debts repaid, threads severed, may the fabric hold. Liu Mianhua, now retired, was called in to review the book. He flipped through it slowly, page by page, and said only. She knew exactly what she was doing. The ledger that spoke. The delivery of the Shuang ledger to Singapore's Trade Authority in 1950 sent ripples across 2 governments and 3 insurance houses. Bound in deep burgundy silk with gold thread and written entirely in elegant brush calligraphy, the ledger was not just a record of financial transactions. It was a confession, a blueprint, a farewell. Inside, every order was logged, real and fake. Every shipment, supplier, courier, and account number was meticulously listed. But Liu Mianhua noticed something more chilling, coded annotations in the margins. They looked like poetic couplets at first glance, but their phrasing repeated across specific pages, always next to high-value transactions. Translated, they read, "Silver flows where silence grows. A whisper in the weave is never noticed. Where there is no witness, there is no fraud. Wrap the lie in satin, and it will shine as truth." Liu wasn't reading a business ledger. He was reading a criminal doctrine, penned not in haste, but as a deliberate transmission. Madame Shen had not just escaped, she had memorialized the con, as though she intended the world to discover and admire it, long after she was gone. Patterns in the web. Liu cross-referenced every alias listed in the ledger. Yuancheng Silk and Sons, Xingyao Trading Co., Ningbo Cooperative, Lotus Export Group, all found in prior shipping manifests, registered under varying handwriting styles, with different false owners across 5 years. Each company lasted no more than 9 months. Each bank account was opened and closed within 120 days. Each shipment passed through ports with only one inspector assigned, an inspector who, Liu later confirmed, had taken early retirement in 1937 and emigrated to Argentina. None of these patterns were random. The Shuang swindle had been a rotating illusion, a carousel of paper identities and manufactured credibility, all tied to the quiet, silk-draped woman with no known photograph. The other Shen. Just as Liu prepared to close the case for the second time, a customs archivist in Penang sent him a message. They had found an old shipping permit from 1935 signed by a Shen Yunxiu, accompanied by a photograph. It was grainy, but clear enough to make out a woman in her late 30s, seated behind a stack of silk bolts, holding a cigarette in a jade holder. She wore glasses thick-rimmed modern Western. Her hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her expression, calm, measured, in control. What stunned Liu wasn't her presence, but her company. Behind her stood 2 men. One wore a warehouse vest, the other, a young man in a British colonial police uniform. Liu matched the face to an officer previously assigned to the Hong Kong port route, a man who had vanished in 1938, presumed dead. He now suspected Shen's web had extended into official institutions, port security, customs verification, and even merchant shipping logs. This wasn't a swindle. It had been a parallel economy. The Silk Codes. In a private meeting with a textile analyst from the Singaporean Ministry of Trade, Liu learned something unexpected. When the bolt of silk sent with the ledger was examined under magnification, its threads revealed a second pattern, invisible to the naked eye. Every third weft thread had been dyed minutely darker, forming a sequence of repeating symbols, a pattern of dots, dashes, and breaks. Morse code. And once decoded, the message read, "Every lie leaves a thread. Pull gently or it will tear the garment." This confirmed Liu's suspicion. Madame Shen hadn't just worked with accountants and smugglers. She had partnered with weavers willing to encode encrypted financial data into the very textiles. Custom bolts, ordered by foreign buyers, might have carried embedded secrets, account numbers, transaction histories, bank routing paths, woven directly into shipments sent abroad. It was elegant, untraceable, and brilliant. And it raised a new, terrifying question. Were these silks not just for fashion, but for funding espionage? A political ghost. The late 1930s were a breeding ground for covert operations. Nationalist forces funding resistance, Japanese agents laundering war money, foreign consulates moving funds through shell companies to support favored factions. What if Shen's operation had been about more than profit? Was she an opportunist? Or an asset? If so, for whom? There was no direct evidence, but in the ledger, a curious symbol appeared 15 times. A stamped crimson lotus. No explanation. Always linked to the largest transactions. Always in shipments destined for Rangoon, Calcutta, and Saigon. Liu discovered that in Burmese and Thai anti-colonial networks, the red lotus was a known symbol of political awakening, used in coded telegrams by resistance groups, which led to a possibility that chilled him. Madame Shen wasn't just laundering money. She may have been funding revolution. The man with the cigarette holder. In 1962, a silk trader named Huang Tao, now elderly and living in Melbourne, read an article about Liu's ledger analysis in an overseas Chinese newspaper. He reached out with a letter. Inside, he recounted how he'd once served as a courier for Xuang in 1936, transporting silk samples between warehouses. He never met Madame Shen, only received instructions by messenger. But one day, a woman in a jade brooch gave him a cigarette holder as a tip. He recognized her years later in a photograph in a Singaporean trade journal, miscaptioned as British Chinese Cultural Delegate, 1946. Same woman, different name, still no trace. He enclosed the cigarette holder in the letter to Liu. Engraved on the silver tip, in nearly microscopic etching, ledgers fade, silk endures. The swindle's legacy. The Xuang swindle remains one of the most refined, quiet, and unprosecuted frauds in Chinese commercial history. No arrests. No official charges. Over 400 international buyers were impacted. At least 17 shell companies were dissolved. Millions in silk and secrets vanished. And yet no bounty was ever placed. No intelligence agency claimed involvement. No government sought extradition. It was as if the world had collectively agreed. This was a crime too beautiful to punish. The forgotten brocade. In 1963, an archivist at the British consulate in Kuala Lumpur, cataloging pre-war textile trade documents, came across an unusual invoice dated March 5, 1936. The recipient was listed as the consulate of Siam. The sender, Yuancheng Silk & Sons, the defunct company at the heart of the Xuang swindle. The invoice included 300 yards of ceremonial brocade, a matching bolt of crimson damask, a special note threaded with lotus weave, payment already rendered, stamped in red wax, a lotus flower identical to the one found in Madame Shen's ledger. What puzzled the archivist was this. The invoice had been restamped in 1946, a full decade later, by the Free Thai movement, a wartime resistance group backed covertly by Allied intelligence. Which meant only one thing. The Xuang operation had touched more than the silk trade. It had passed through the shadow networks of wartime finance, diplomacy, and espionage. Madame Shen hadn't just stolen money. She created a pipeline of wealth, silk, and secrets. The thread runs red. Back in Shanghai, Liu Mianhua, now in his 70s, was invited to give a lecture on economic deception at the East China Institute of Political Science. He declined. Instead, he sent a letter that was later read aloud by the dean. The greatest lies are never told in courtrooms. They are passed between hands in quiet shops, in shipments that arrive early, in bolts of fabric that hang in museum galleries. They are the crimes we call elegant, and therefore choose not to punish. Liu then disappeared from public life. Some say he moved to Canada, others that he became an advisor for post-war trade audits. But in his apartment, found years later by distant relatives, was a single framed item, a square of hand-dyed silk, faded, wrapped around a pressed lotus flower. Tucked into the frame's back panel, a white dragon mahjong tile, the same kind recovered in the murder in the mahjong parlor case. It bore a microscopic engraving, Shen, a woman with no face. Despite the clues, the ledger, the coated silk, the offshore shell companies, the photograph, no verified image of Madame Shen has ever been confirmed. Her name appears in port registries, land titles, customs slips, and banking statements, but never with the same signature twice. Multiple handwriting experts concluded that the ledger alone was likely written by 3 different hands, suggesting Madame Shen may have been a composite identity, either a network of women operating under a single brand, or a single woman using multiple trained proxies. And then came one final revelation. In 1972, during a flood in Hangzhou, a submerged wooden crate surfaced from a collapsed warehouse. Inside were several bolts of silk, water-damaged, a small lockbox of jade buttons, a passport British issue in the name of Yunxiu Shen, and a personal notebook containing silk sketches and encryption diagrams. The passport photo was intact. The woman, late 40s, calm eyes, a face untouched by vanity, looked directly into the lens. On the back of the photo, a handwritten line. Do not chase the thread. By the time you follow it, I have already woven something else. A legacy without a trial. To this day, the Shuang fine silks and imports case is taught in international finance courses and forensic accounting seminars, not as a warning, but as a masterclass in nonviolent, structurally perfect white-collar deception. The ledger, now stored in a temperature-controlled archive in Singapore, remains the most complete surviving artifact of the case. The bolt of Morse-coded silk has been displayed at the Shanghai Museum of Textile History, without mention of its criminal origin. A few of the original counterfeit bolts still circulate in private collections, indistinguishable from the finest Suzhou silk. In 2004, a noted textile collector paid $72,000 USD for a bolt once attributed to Shuang. When asked why, he replied, "Because crime, like silk, is best appreciated in how smoothly it hides the stitch." End reflection. The silk ledger swindle left no bodies, no broken glass, no courtroom drama. Only pages of whispered numbers, shadows of a woman in Cheongsam, and the uncanny feeling that someone had outwitted a system simply by understanding it better than anyone else ever had. Shen Yunxiu, if that was her name, didn't just sell silk. She wove herself into the fabric of global trade, moved millions without firing a shot, and vanished into myth. So the next time you run your hand over a bolt of fabric in a shop that seems too quiet, remember, not all weavers make garments. Some make ghosts. The most trusted man on Fuzhou Road. In the crowded heart of Old Shanghai's bookseller district, near where Fuzhou Road narrowed and curved like a calligrapher's flourish, stood Lie's Treasures, a shop so thoroughly embedded in the city's cultural memory that it was said even pickpockets walked past it in silence. Run by a thin, stooped man with wire-rimmed spectacles and an uncanny ability to identify Ming porcelain at a glance, Mr. Lai Tiancheng had been a fixture of Shanghai's antique scene for over 3 decades. Patrons said he spoke softly, moved slowly, and always brewed a second pot of oolong for anyone who lingered in the late afternoon. His shop was a museum of gentle deceit. Cracked ivory netsuke, delicate snuff bottles, Qing scrolls of uncertain origin, and the occasional treasure so rare and so exquisitely unpriced that it made collectors sweat behind their spectacles. But on the morning of March 12, 1938, Mr. Lai's empire, built on trust and tact, shattered like a careless vase. Because when he arrived to open his shop, he found his rarest cabinet completely empty. And moments later, he staggered into the police station, drenched in cold sweat, reporting that he had been robbed. The missing items. The cabinet it held. A Han Dynasty bronze mirror, inlaid with silver spirals. A Song Dynasty Celadon bowl, with a hairline crack that made it pricelessly unique. A jade cicada, rumored to have belonged to a Manchu princess. And most importantly, a Tang-era lacquered prayer scroll, sealed in a black sandalwood box. According to Mr. Lai, these items had been stored behind a triple-locked glass pane beneath velvet cloth. The locks had been forced, the cabinet pried open. He claimed the crime must have happened overnight, and no alarm had sounded. The only other person with a key, himself. And perhaps he conceded his apprentice, Liang Fen, but she had gone back to her family home 2 weeks earlier. The robbery, he said, had been surgical. No other items were touched, no coins taken, no glass shattered. Inspector Lu Wenji was immediately skeptical. An unusual crime scene. Lu knew Mr. Lai by reputation, gentle, precise, a man who knew the difference between damage and design. And that was why the crime scene was so strange. There was no glass on the floor, though the cabinet's doors were ajar. No scratches on the wood, no scuff marks on the floor. The locks appeared to have been cleanly picked, not forced. And behind the cabinet, Lu noticed something odd, a faint outline in dust the shape of a footstep. But not walking toward the cabinet, walking away from the back wall. The secret compartment. Suspecting something hidden, Lu returned that night with a flashlight and a slim pry bar. He worked in silence, tapping the wood paneling behind the cabinet. He found it a hollow point. Behind it, a sliding panel expertly built, impossible to spot without knowing it was there. Inside, a narrow crawl space just wide enough for a slender adult to pass through. At the end, a tiny service corridor, formerly used by shopkeepers to access coal and deliveries before the district was modernized. And just outside that corridor's exit, a rented rickshaw, abandoned 2 blocks away, with a black sandalwood box in the footwell. Empty. A stage theft. Lu now suspected that the robbery had been staged. The items might not have been stolen at all. They might have been removed by Lai himself, or by someone close to him, using the hidden exit. But why would an honest dealer fake his own theft? Unless the items had already been sold quietly, illegally, and Lai now needed an excuse to cover their absence. Lu's theory: the curio dealer was not the victim. He was the conductor. Enter Liang Fen. Lai's apprentice, Liang Fen, had been with him for 5 years. An orphaned daughter of a scholar, she was said to have a hand for dusting and an eye for liars. Collectors adored her. Auction agents feared her. And yet she had left without warning, returning, so said Mr. Lai, to her family home in Hangzhou. Lu tracked her down. But Liang was not in Hangzhou. In fact, she had never arrived. Her last known location: a passenger manifest for a steamship bound for Kobe, Japan, under the name Fang Yunli. She had left Shanghai 6 days before the robbery. And in her cabin's declaration manifest, nothing listed, except for antique lacquer box, personal devotional item. The fake provenance papers. Lu pressed deeper into Mr. Lai's recent business. He found a collector, a Swiss-born Chinese art buyer named Matthias Ko, who had visited Lai's treasures 3 weeks before the reported theft. Ko said he had been shown 2 of the missing items, including the jade cicada, and had been offered a deal to purchase all 4 pieces, quietly, off record. The price far lower than market, but only if he agreed to pick up the items overseas. In Osaka, Ko refused and now realized why. The sale was never meant to be recorded. Lai wasn't robbed. He was laundering the loss, selling the goods abroad, then reporting them stolen, to eliminate legal risk and preserve his reputation. Why fake a theft? In Shanghai's tightly wound antique scene, provenance was everything. A legitimate dealer couldn't afford to be caught selling disputed artifacts, especially under the shadow of looming war and foreign occupation. By reporting a robbery, Lai could eliminate ownership. If the items resurfaced, he could claim they were stolen and resold beyond his control. File an insurance claim and be compensated for the loss. Maintain his standing as a victim, not a smuggler. But something didn't add up. Lu couldn't find an insurance policy for the items. And when he pressed the agency Lai mentioned, they claimed no such policy existed. So if there was no payout, what was the real motive? A deal with the black market. Lu's final clue came from a customs official at the port of Kobe, who sent word back through diplomatic channels. A jade cicada, matching Lai's description, had appeared in a private sale 2 days after the robbery, bought by a Tokyo collector with known ties to the Yamato-kai, Japan's powerful antiquities black market. Accompanying the artifact was a falsified certificate of origin, signed in Shanghai by none other than Liang Fen, under her alias. This meant the items had been smuggled intentionally. Lai and Liang worked together. The robbery was staged not for money, but for escape. But why leave now? Lu began to suspect a deeper urgency. Shanghai, by early 1938, was under increasing military pressure. The Japanese invasion had destabilized banks, broken supply lines, and flooded the markets with counterfeit relics. Lai may have realized that his entire collection, carefully built over 30 years, was about to be worthless in war. So he cashed out carefully, using Liang as his operative. He let her flee, staged the theft, and prepared to disappear himself. But he never did. Lai's quiet collapse. 2 months after the investigation stalled, Mr. Lai closed his shop permanently. No charges were filed. No proof of collusion surfaced. The antique world, bound by silence and propriety, looked the other way. Lai was last seen sipping tea outside a dumpling stall on Fuzhou Road, staring at an empty storefront. A week later, he was found dead in his apartment, no signs of struggle, a simple note beside him. Everything must pass, even the beautiful lies. A death without a crime. When Mr. Lai Tiancheng was found slumped in his armchair, teacup resting undisturbed on the table beside him, the initial ruling was natural causes. He was in his 60s, frail, and had been under increasing stress. But Inspector Lu Wenji wasn't satisfied. There was no doctor's note, no medical record of illness, no clear sign of poison or injury, but also no clear reason why a man with an apparent escape plan in motion would suddenly give up. Then again, maybe it wasn't surrender. Maybe it was strategy. Because as Lu reviewed the apartment, he noticed something strange. None of the usual items a man like Mr. Lai would own were present. No private collection, no business ledger, no scrolls, no coins, not even an abacus. It was a life scrubbed clean. Almost as if the man had already moved on. A man with 2 names. In the back of a drawer, wrapped in a thin linen cloth, Lu found something peculiar. An old residency card issued to Lai Tiancheng in 1905, and another, more recent, issued in 1927 under the name Zhao Wenrui. The photo was the same man, the address matched. Why the alias? Lu began searching municipal records and discovered that Zhao Wenrui had once operated a curio shop in Tianjin, which had abruptly shuttered following an investigation into forged Tibetan relics in 1926. The shop was burned in an apparent arson. No arrests were made. The owner was never located. A year later, Lai's treasures opened in Shanghai. The falsified past. This changed everything. Mr. Lai had not just staged a robbery, he had staged a second life. He had reinvented himself with a new name, relocated, and quietly climbed his way back into the antique world. Slowly, carefully, and by all accounts successfully. But the reemergence of falsified Tibetan relics in the 1930s, this time appearing in Tokyo's private collections, suggested something else. Lai or Zhao had never stopped forging. He had simply become better at hiding it. And Liang Fen. She wasn't just a gifted assistant. She was his apprentice in the art of deception. The apprentice returns. In 1940, a Japanese collector traveling under a diplomatic passport visited Saigon with a private shipment of antiquities. Customs seized the cargo after inconsistencies in paperwork. Among the items, a hand bronze mirror, identical to the one Mr. Lai had reported stolen. A jade cicada, worn smooth, fitted in a silver clasp. And most remarkably, a lacquered prayer scroll, still sealed, its box inscribed with a poem in Tang calligraphy. The collector was released, the artifacts were returned. But the agent inspecting the crate, a Vietnamese-born customs officer with an eye for calligraphy, reported one final detail to French authorities. A signature carved inside the box lid, almost invisible. It read Yunli, Liang Fen's new identity. Lu, now older and relegated to historical consultancy, received the report through a trade channel he maintained out of personal interest. Yunli was the name Liang Fen had used on her ship out of Shanghai. She was alive and active, no longer posing as an assistant, but as a dealer in her own right, operating through diplomatic back channels and private sales. She had perfected the act Lai began, and she had improved on it. The faked theft was a seed. Re-examining the original robbery, Lu now saw it differently. It wasn't just an escape plan or a cover. It was a handover. Lai had orchestrated a public disappearance of the items to launder their provenance, free them from Chinese legal traceability, and gift Liang with assets to launch her own career. He staged the theft, Liang carried the goods. And by disappearing, by dying, or pretending to die, Lai had ensured his past couldn't compromise her future. The illusion of loss. Lu published a discreet memorandum on the case in 1941 for internal police archives only. He titled it, Objects in Motion, the Invisible Exchange in Criminal Provenance. In it he wrote, the perfect theft is not one in which the thief disappears. It is one in which no one realizes the thief was never separate from the victim, where the owner, the object, and the crime are all the same hand, threaded together like silk, hidden beneath glass that never needed to be cracked. The cabinet reappears. In 1965, an American collector visited an antique market in Kyoto and purchased a glass cabinet of uncertain origin, which the vendor claimed had once belonged to a Shanghai curio dealer. The drawer bore a carved mark, a lotus flower. The hinges matched photographs from old Shanghai shop advertisements. Inside the cabinet, when cleaned, the collector found a folded note, in ink faded but clear. Do not mourn what is lost. The cabinet was always meant to be empty. The treasures were never mine, they were simply passing through. Signed LT. End reflection. The case of Lai Tiancheng, or Zhao Wenrui, or the man who called himself both, stands as one of the most quiet and complex deceptions in Shanghai's true crime history. No charges were filed. No arrests made. No official bounty placed. Yet the swindle was real. The theft was never solved because it was never meant to be. It was a ceremony, an exit ritual, a performance. And as for Liang Fen, the world remembers her only in whispers, a jade pin at an auction, a calligraphy mark on a forged scroll. But collectors today still pass around a phrase. If the glass is unbroken, check the hinges. Because some cabinets are meant to be emptied, and some crimes are meant to become legends. Shanghai 1932, a city that never slept. If Paris had its salons and New York its speakeasies, Shanghai had the Crimson Bell. Hidden 3 floors above a defunct department store on Nanjing Road, the nightclub was a haze of cigarette smoke, saxophone tremors, and champagne that tasted like gold, but was bottled in France's forgotten corners. And at its center, seated on a baby grand piano under a low amber spotlight, was Miss May Ren, the jazz singer who had never given a real interview and whose passport, if it existed, no one had seen. They said she was Shanghainese, or maybe born in Saigon. Some whispered she was French Vietnamese, or the daughter of a missionary and a concubine. No one really knew, but every night as she crooned Billie Holiday through crimson lipstick, every eye in the room followed only her. Then one evening in October, as she paused between songs, a man in the second booth lit a cigarette and never exhaled. Because by the time the ember burned halfway, he was already dead. Slumped forward, silent, poisoned. And seated alone at the table across from him was Miss May Wren. The victim, an exiled consul with a hidden past. The man's name was Cecil Harrington, once a junior British consular official posted to Tianjin, later reassigned to Hong Kong, then quietly dismissed in 1928. Officially, the file said health reasons. Unofficially, Lu Wenji, now acting as a regional intelligence liaison, would later uncover a pattern. Private trips to Hanoi. Unregistered assets in Macau. A series of letters seized during an anti-smuggling raid in 1930, mentioning a jade sunflower, the code name for an informant-turned-operative, suspected of working both sides of the colonial line. Harrington had returned to Shanghai under a false business front as a rubber broker. But he never shipped rubber, never visited warehouses, only drank, watched jazz, and on occasion met women who disappeared by morning. Miss May Wren, however, had met him 4 times. Always alone, always at the Crimson Bell. The last meeting ended with his death. The poison that didn't smell. Harrington's body showed no wounds, no struggle, no signs of force. The only item out of place was his silver cigarette case, open, empty, resting just within reach. The coroner later found residue of cyanide on the inner hinge. Not on the cigarette. Not on the lighter. Just the case. It was enough to kill, with contact through skin or lips, if handled under heat or pressure, say, by lighting a cigarette in the steamy humidity of a jazz club. The poison, however, was not industrial grade. It was refined, extracted from crushed seeds, and suspended in a paste used only in Southeast Asian pharmacological circles. This wasn't an accident. It was a signature. The singer's silence. When questioned, Miss May Wren gave only this. He offered me a cigarette. I declined. He smiled. Then he coughed once, and that was the end of the song. She claimed no knowledge of his identity beyond being a regular customer. She had never accepted gifts, never visited his hotel suite. Her alibi was her voice. Dozens of patrons heard her sing at the moment of his death. But her file, quietly requested from French Indochina's colonial archives, revealed more. Her name wasn't May Wren. It was Nguyen Thai Lan, born in Saigon, daughter of a violinist and a silk merchant, fluent in French, Mandarin, and Cantonese, arrested once at 17 for illegal pamphlet distribution, released without charges, disappeared from records in 1927, resurfaced in Shanghai under a stage name, and began singing at the Crimson Bell 2 months after Harrington arrived in town. The spy who loved music. Lu Wenji, reviewing his old case files, recalled a rumor from 1930 that the French had quietly cultivated female operatives from Indochina to embed within Chinese trade circuits, smuggling not goods, but information. Whisper networks, shipping manifests, the names of European collaborators selling intelligence to Japanese backchannels. The most effective of these spies, it was said, could kill with a look and disappear in applause. One codename kept appearing, Jade Sunflower. And one name kept circling that codename, Lan. More deaths in her wake. Harrington was not the first. In 1929, a Dutch arms dealer in Saigon was found drowned in his own bath, with bruises on his lips. In 1931, a Vietnamese merchant linked to black market opium routes in Yunnan was found dead in his shop, no cause determined. In 1932, a Japanese intelligence agent operating under a Buddhist monk disguise was reported missing in Kunming. Witnesses last saw him at a tavern with a woman who matched Land's description: hair like lacquer, voice like smoke. None of the deaths were connected. Until now. Because each man had previously been spotted with a woman who called herself May, Lan, or N. And each man had ties to arms shipments, blackmail, or state secrets. The Crimson Bell closes. 2 weeks after Harrington's death, the Crimson Bell was shut down for regulatory violations. Miss May Wren vanished. Not officially deported, not arrested, simply gone. Rumors placed her in a Macau cabaret, a French military base on Hainan Island, a convent in Laos, and most strangely on a steamer to Marseille, registered under the name Claimants L. None of these sightings were confirmed, but the assassin's calling card, a single silver cigarette case, wiped clean, left on a hotel bed in Phnom Penh, turned up in 1935, alongside another mysterious poisoning. Same pattern, same silence, same perfume. An assassin in a minor key. Was she a killer, a patriot, a pawn? Or something else? Lu Wenji, in one of his final case notes on the file, simply wrote, "There are those who kill for money. There are those who kill for their country. But the most dangerous ones kill because they are told to sing. And then when the song ends, they vanish with the music." Interpol's curious dossier. By 1935, whispers about a Southeast Asian assassin traveling under a rotating list of stage names began to filter through Interpol field stations in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Marseille. They had no photo, no fingerprint, only a pattern. Target was always a man tied to sensitive trade or intelligence. Death came by rare, undetectable poison. The killer was always last seen in a club, concert, or bar, performing or watching. And she always disappeared within 24 hours of the incident. Interpol began referring to her as the cantatress, the singer. Behind closed doors, they circulated the theory. She was an asset cultivated by either the French Colonial Intelligence Bureau or a breakaway anti-colonial cell, designed to infiltrate diplomatic circles and eliminate double agents, defectors, and traffickers. But no government confirmed her existence, and no agency claimed responsibility, because to name her would be to admit that she was used. Lu's private investigation. Lu Wenji, semi-retired but still connected to Shanghai's underworld by respect alone, found himself haunted by May Wren's voice. He'd heard her perform once, not during a case, not under assignment, but by chance in late 1931. The memory lingered. Her voice wasn't just soft, it was intentional. Each note was a step. Now, with the pattern clear, he quietly compiled a timeline of deaths across East and Southeast Asia between 1928 and 1936, looking for cases that matched the profile. He found 7. 4 were confirmed poisonings, 3 were marked unsolved cardiac failure. All involved men with links to covert trade, guns, intelligence, narcotics. All had a last known sighting of a woman in red, a woman who sang, or a foreign beauty who spoke Chinese or French. The hotel bellboy's confession. In one of the cases, Hanoi, 1930, Lu tracked down an elderly former bellboy from the Hotel de l'Orient. The man remembered an incident from years prior, a British trader found dead in his room. No signs of robbery, no injuries, just a cigarette case and a handkerchief folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The bellboy swore he'd seen a woman in a white kippah leave the room around 2 a.m. He was paid to say nothing, but he remembered her perfume, jasmine and smoke. He remembered her humming. She didn't walk, she glided, like she was still on stage. A surprising appearance in Marseille. Then in 1936, something changed. A soprano named Clémence Lan was listed on the program for a charity opera in Marseille. She sang twice, once in Vietnamese, once in French. A grainy photo was taken by a local society paper. When Lou received the clipped article, he stared for a long time. It was her, older, paler, but unmistakably Lan. Which begged the question, had she defected? Had she gone to France as a protected asset? Or had she finally found a way to disappear permanently in a place where no one would think to chase a war-born ghost? The postmarked letter. In 1937, a letter arrived at Lou's old precinct in Shanghai. No return address, French postage, inside. A single cigarette case. Polished silver, empty. And inside the lid, scratched faintly in Vietnamese script. No one sings forever. But if you must leave, leave on a high note. There was no name. But the letter was marked for Lou by hand. Theories and echoes. Lou speculated privately in his notebooks. Lan was recruited young, radicalized by colonial trauma, trained in music to mask her other function. She was given targets deemed dangerous, men whose deaths would shift the intelligence balance. Her assignments were coded in art, music as cover, femininity as camouflage. And when she finally chose to disappear, she did it through song, not violence. Reflections from the room she left behind. The Crimson Bell, now a storage room above a refurbished bookstore, holds no trace of her. But Lou once revisited it in 1940. He sat where Harrington had died. He said the room still smelled faintly of jasmine oil and aged mahogany. He left a note beneath the floorboard, in a plastic envelope. It simply read, "You were never the ghost. You were the curtain between two worlds. And you closed when the story was finished." Unanswered questions. Was Lan ever truly working for a government, or only for herself? Was she eliminating threats or settling private scores? Did she vanish into the world of artists, or was she silenced by those who once used her? The truth, like her songs, lingers but doesn't explain. Because some stories are not puzzles to solve, but chords to hear. And some crimes are committed not with bullets or knives, but with a voice that chooses when it will never be heard again. The opera that never opened. In 1938, Paris was preparing for a rare cultural collaboration, a musical revue featuring voices from across the colonial territories, meant to symbolize unity through art. Among the announced performers, a Vietnamese-French soprano named Clémence Lan. But 3 days before the opening, she vanished from her hotel. The only clue left behind. A folded red kippah laid across the bed, a pressed lotus flower tucked into the collar, and an envelope left unsealed containing a single train ticket to Lisbon and a cryptic phrase handwritten on hotel stationery. "If they ever ask, tell them I went west." To chase a silence louder than applause. She never performed, and was never seen again. Lou's final ledger. Back in Shanghai, as war loomed on the horizon, Lou Wenji compiled his final notes on the case. He no longer sought justice, just completion. What emerged from his files wasn't just a dossier on a missing woman, but a map of disappearing edges, places where colonial agendas, art, and espionage met in quiet corridors and candlelit clubs. Here, what he believed. Lan, trained in both voice and poison, had been a soft kill asset. She was likely handled first by a private French intelligence branch, then passed into gray networks, neither fully state-controlled nor rogue. Her last targets weren't enemies of the state, but loose ends, men who knew too much about what she was created to be. In her final years, she may have killed not for cause but for escape. A witness comes forward. In 1951, a Portuguese journalist named Duarte Ferreira published a serialized memoir titled The Woman Who Vanished Twice. One chapter described a mysterious woman who boarded a ferry in Lisbon in 1938. She traveled alone, carried a worn leather valise, and spoke Vietnamese-accented French. She disembarked in Casablanca, paid in cash, and then disappeared into the Medina. Ferreira claimed her name was Clemence. He shared no proof, but in a footnote he included a line. She sang me one lullaby. Said it was for her mother. I've never heard it again, but I remember the way she looked out to sea afterward, as if the waves were her last audience. Artifacts and aftershocks. Over the decades, rumors of Lan's identity continued to surface. A silver cigarette case in a Belgian estate sale, identical to the one found beside Harrington. A lacquered music box in a Kyoto gallery, which played a haunting tune with no known composer. A recording uncovered in a Saigon archive in 1980 labeled L'Envoi 1931 Shanghai. Too degraded to verify, but with a voice faintly humming, I'll be seeing you. Some say these are coincidences. Others believe they are breadcrumbs she left deliberately, for anyone persistent enough to follow, but wise enough not to get too close. The true nature of her crimes. What made Lan or Mei Ren or Clemence so dangerous? It wasn't the poison. It was how little she left behind. She existed in fragments. A whispered lyric. A fogged mirror. The echo of a love song that was never really about love. She made every stage her confessional, and every death a curtain call. But there were no tickets. No audience lists. No playbills. Only witnesses who swear they once heard something so beautiful, it made them forget she had blood on her hands. Lu's final words on the case. In his private memoirs, Lu concluded, "Some assassins wear shadows. She wore silk and smoke. But she was never just a killer. She was the silence between betrayals. The breath before the final note. And when she chose not to sing again, the world forgot what danger sounded like." Legacy in silence. Today, no law enforcement agency claims to have officially pursued her. No government admits she was theirs. But among intelligence historians, the name Lan is treated like an urban myth. A ghostly case study. A file too dangerous or too beautiful to close. And in jazz circles, some say there's a standard that's never recorded. Pass by ear. A melody with no title, no sheet music, and one haunting refrain. They call it the widow's note.